The question has a way of returning like the tide that gnaws patiently at the same crescent of shore, leaving behind new shapes that are old shapes, new swirls of rumor that are the same rumor, a memory never satisfied until it becomes a certainty sculpted from sand. And so it is that whispers persist that the dwarf lord of Casterly Rock, the wry and wounded son whom Tywin Lannister could never quite separate from his own reflection, is in truth the issue of dragon seed, a secret Targaryen, hidden in the golden pride of the West. To judge the matter, we must know first how truth moves in our lands, for it seldom strides like a king beneath banners but limps like a camp follower, carrying pack upon pack of interpretation, motive, fear, and hope, and often it is midwives and singers, those most likely to be shamed or praised by a tale, who fix the shape of a story upon the childbed of history. I speak not to mock the small folk or the poets, for the realm is woven of both, but to mark that when we weigh parentage in the scales, we are weighing more than seed and womb. We are sifting vanity, the politics of affront and allegiance, the hunger of prophecy, and the moral need of a wounded age to discover in blood the logic of fate. Thus, before we examine the man, we must set the hall where the rumor was born, and that hall is the long, uneasy marriage of a king and his hand, Ares of the restless eyes and Tywin of the iron face, and between them a woman whose only transgression in the judgment of the court was to be lovely, clever, and, by law and conjecture, loved by both. For Joanna Lannister stands at the heart of the question like a candle whose light seems to come from two directions. The years of the young reign were years when the king still played at wisdom and the hand still consented to play at friendship. But even then the habit of the realm was to look at Tywin and see governance, to look at Ares and see the crown itself made uncertain flesh. And when the court looked at Joanna, Lannister by birth and marriage, lady-in-waiting by appointment, it saw a mirror in which the king's unsteadiness and the hand's authority came so near as to almost touch. For in the gossip of the galleries and the private letters that passed through Sept and Maester's Tower, it was said that the king's compliments to Joanna took on edges sharper than compliments ought to have, and that the queen, pious and bruised by fate, dismissed her lady to spare herself the daily sting. Whether the dismissal sprang from jealousy or prudence or the council of Septas has never been written with ink that would dry, but the court remembered the lewd japes the king could not keep from his tongue and the sudden gravity with which Lord Tywin received them, and it remembered too that Joanna returned west and there, in due course, and after a span of years that were neither few nor so many as to put calculation beyond human likelihood, she conceived once more and died birthing a son who lived. That son was Tyrion, and at once the midwives of rumor began to speak of a dragon who had killed his mother to come wailing into the world, for in our chronicles the line between omen and cruelty is needle-thin, and it becomes thinner when a child's body is imperfect, since men trained to see providence in beauty are always tempted to see malediction in deformity. The whisperers, then, began to tally reasons the way a moneylender counts coins. That the father who reigned showed that dangerous mix of fascination and cruelty toward Joanna that a damaged lord sometimes shows to that which he cannot rule. That the husband who served, a paragon of pride, found himself mocked in public and would rather be stripped of flesh than accept that the laughter might be deserved. That the child who came had hair so pale as to seem white in certain lights and eyes that disagreed with one another, as if each eye looked on a different father. That the dwarf's first infatuation was with dragons and books and dreams, and that later his stratagem at the Blackwater called forth a green dragon of wildfire rather than a force of men, as though his nature turned always to cunning flame. That the last words his father spoke to him were the kind men utter when truth strikes through fury, "No son of mine," and that those words detonated like stored wildfire in the corridors of memory because the realm had been prepared to hear them as a confession spoken at the edge of the abyss. Such are the coins. But in our counting we must bite the silver and test its ring, for there is more false silver uncoined than minted, and a great lord's rage is the basest alloy in the treasuries of men. And Tywin Lannister's anger was not the sort that reveals, it was the sort that destroys, and if we make each insult into evidence we shall prove 1,000 impossible things before breakfast. Let us, then, take the measure of what may be proved without the mummer's art, which is to say, let us set first the arithmetic of years and places, the dry wheat of chronology from which even the sweetest wine of rumor must be pressed, and we find this. Joanna left the capital after her dismissal and dwelled chiefly at Casterly Rock, and the king, who grew more suspicious and more confined as his reign wore on, seldom took the westward road, and when he did the journey was noticed and recorded, while other instances of his closeness to Joanna are matters of licorice quips and the vague recollection of affronted courtiers. The tale that he took liberties with her on the night of her bedding is precisely the sort of tale that flourishes in the darkness where the harvest of proof cannot grow, lawless, unseasoned, intoxicating. Men repeat it because it satisfies the pride of thinking a lord's humiliation has an author divine enough to excuse their own delight. And if we accept it, we must also accept that a king who could not keep the cup from his lips or his hands from his vices somehow found 9 years and more. After the twins were born and far from the eyes of those who would sell a sight for coin, an opportunity to plant a seed that ripened by fate to look like the father he most despised. For if we are to judge by bodies, Tyrion's hair, at its lightest, is fair of the west rather than the silver of the east, and his eyes, even in their disagreement, never turned the violet of old Valyria. To be sure, Valyrian blood has manifested in strange ways, from the famed Sharera whose eyes took different colors to the dragon seeds who rose in the blackest war of the Targaryens. But those were marked by the unmistakable stamp of that blood in other traits, and none of these marks sat upon the dwarf's brow, nor did any dragon bend the neck to him. For the talk that dragons do not harm that blood has been proved a half-truth at best and a comfortable lie at worst, since dragons have burned Targaryens and spared men without a dribble of Valyrian ancestry when whim and hunger demanded. So the body yields no certain answer, and the calendar yields no certain occasion, and we move then to motives, for in courts and councils the seed of motive grows heartier than the seed of lust. Would Ares, jealous even of shadows, have risked the peril of taking the hand's wife under the very banners of his power, knowing that discovery would loose the West in a fury the crown could not bottle? He was reckless, yes, and thought himself untouchable, but he was also a coward in his marrow, and cowards are careful until they are cornered, and at that time the king still believed himself adored. Would Joanna, not shy of wit and not blind to the world, have played the fool to such a man and so betrayed husband, house, and children for the embrace of a fire she knew to be filthy? Men are always quicker to ascribe to women a taste for peril than to grant them a habit of prudence. And I grant that prudence is not the chief virtue of beauty in the songs, but we are not keeping songs, we are weighing lives. And lastly, would Tywin? The Lord of the Rock was a creature of control rather than impulse, and nothing in him suggests that he would bear a living monument to his public humiliation beneath his roof, place his own golden name upon it, and then allow it to survive, wed, and rule his seat. Men point out that he did none of those things with joy, and they are right, but he did them nonetheless, and that is the point. If he had believed the boy a dragons get, Tyrion would never have reached manhood, or if he had, it would have been in a black cell beneath stone, a secret like a wound wrapped tight in silence, not in the sunlight where he might mock his father and later flee the city under the weight of catastrophic choices. Some will object that Tywin's pride forbade him from admitting the truth to himself, that he became the servant of his own denial, but that is the language of those who construct labyrinths in which any path leads to the same conclusion. The harder truth is simpler. Tywin despised his youngest for the injury done to his beloved wife, for the challenge the boy's body posed to Lannister spectacle, for the way the child's mirth revealed a gap between the gravity the father prized and the quickness the son possessed, and for a more intimate reason than all these, which is that Tyrion saw through him. Strip a great lord of all his gold and pages and pillars, and the thing he fears is an eye that can tell the hour of his heart, and Tyrion's mismatched gaze kept the Lord of the Rock honest in the way a demon keeps a septon honest, by refusing to look away. There is, too, in that household story the matter of a woman's death that no lore can make fair, for Joanna died when Tyrion lived, and death in childbed is the cruelest arithmetic in our world, reducing a family's future to one before and one after with a knife slice in between, and Tywin's accountants of grief were savage. Every drink Tyrion took, every jest he made, every courage he showed or cruelty he committed, came to his father wrapped in the memory of warm blood on cold sheets, and no man so proud can keep the memory from scalding, and so he tried instead to brand the boy. Pity that clothed itself as contempt, or contempt that clothed itself as pity. It is not for me to say which thread was more honest in Tywin's garments, but both threads were woven through with rage, and rage, being headless, shouts the same sentence at every target, "No son of mine," and men who stand nearby take it down as truth when it was only pain. Yet let us not absolve Tyrion of the deeds that lift rumor like hawks upon a summer wind, for he killed the father who despised him, and because the old lion's end came in a privy stinking of night soil, a manner that reduced magnificence to mortality, the deed took on a shape in the imagination of the realm that no sober discourse can wholly undo. Of course, say the whisperers, Targaryen bastard would slay a Lannister father, for dragons make cruel ends of lions in the songs. But a chronicler must observe instead that men kill their fathers more often for love fouled than for blood disputed, and that a son who learned the truth of Tisha and endured the betrayal of his last, sad solace did not require Valyrian fire to draw a bow. He required only that particular Lannister education in justice which is merely revenge pronounced in a clear voice. If one seeks dragons' blood to explain such a deed, one is willfully turning away from the brutal sufficiency of human grief, and there is no learning in that. However, if the body and the calendar and the motives do not compel us to the dragon, what of the more ethereal proofs that certain minds favor? Signs, symbols, convergences of meaning that suggest a design beyond the plane and the course. It is here that the seduction of the theory is greatest, for Tyrion is a creature of paradox who fits too neatly into certain prophecies not to tempt the heart that longs to see all the world's ragged edges shed with a single thread. As a child, he dreamed of dragons and begged for one, as if the soul in him knew what the flesh could not claim, and later he conjured green gouts upon the Blackwater and crowned the sky with fire that turned men to cinder, which is the labor of dragons if ever a man has performed it without scales. And we cannot ignore the old belief, carried through 3 centuries of ash and triumph, that the dragon must have 3 heads, and that the world, being fond of trios, insists on them even when the counting hand shakes. In some tellings, the 3 are the children of a storm and a sea, in others they are aspects of a single conqueror reborn, and in still others they are not born of the same mother but called from the corners of the earth in the hour of danger. And so the mind hungry for pattern sees in the dwarf of the west the salt of cunning that might balance the sweet of mercy and the iron of destiny in the other heads. But to read prophecy in this manner is to make prophecy a puppet to our wish, and there is no surer way to invite catastrophe than to confound the order of signs with the order of deeds. If we tally the chronicles of the Targaryen host, we find dragons that obeyed small folk with a drop of old blood and dragons that spurned crowned scions of the line. We find siblings of the same womb bearing hair like winter wheat and eyes like summer violets, and yet no affinity in their natures. We find birth tragedies and monstrous infants, and we find hale heirs who became monsters only in their choices. And from such a harvest it is folly to say that the pattern insists Tyrion must be a Targaryen because our hearts prefer a triangle to a line. Yet the triangle remains in another sense, not of prophecy but of character. For Tyrion's life is the patient negotiation of 3 authorities that rule Westeros beneath the names men give them: power, legacy, and morality. And if any man proves that these are not harmonies but rival choirs that must each be tuned or the music becomes unbearable, it is he. Power taught him early that the weak do not survive with meekness alone, and so he grew a wit like a dagger kept clean and ready, and this wit brought him friends who were not virtuous but were loyal to the man who paid them the respect of straight dealing. A sell's word in black leathers who gambled his life on the dwarf's calm. Arithmetic mountain folk who found in the little lord a promise kept. A turncloak sell-sale who survived by trading on all and found himself the debtor to one who would not trade his soul. Legacy taught him that a great house can be a prison when its mottos are iron bars, and that a father's pride can be the cruelest steward of land and name, denying the heir who does not fit the mask. Morality taught him, through a girl in a farmhouse and through the queen's jests and through the royal city's starving boys, that the line dividing justice from vengeance is as thin as a hair from his own head, and that mercy without prudence is a scroll without a seal, admirable and ignored. No dragon needs to be invoked to explain these lessons, for the realm teaches them to any mind that will listen. Yet it is precisely because Tyrion learned them so closely that men desire to fasten him to some supernatural schema, as if the pain of his schooling must have been inflicted for a reason beyond the ordinary cruelty of life. I say instead that the reason is precisely this. In a land where so many make an idol of birth, Tyrion demonstrates the radical claim that chosen deeds define a man more than seeded blood, even when seeded blood is all men want to speak of. If, then, we reduce the theory to its marrow and ask what the realm gains by declaring Tyrion the son of Ares, we find that it gains a more elegant story and loses a more instructive one. For elegance, note how the accusation flatters every grudge. The West can explain away the shame of a misshapen heir. The loyalists can claim another scion upon whom to project their fantasies of return. The credulous may say that Dragonfire redeemed kings landing from the siege at the very moment that a dragon unwittingly stood at the city's ramparts, and the cynical can assert that the civil blood of the realm is so entangled that even its sharpest lines, wolf, lion, dragon, are merely threads in one rope curled round the throat of fate. For instruction, however, we must keep Tyrion Lannister a Lannister, because only then does the tragedy of his house speak plainly to the duties and failures of power. The father who prized image above truth crafted a son who preferred truth even when it ruined images, and the house that thought glory a shine that must never be clouded bred a mind that understood shine is nothing if the gold underneath is soft. If he is a dragon, then his defiance of Tywin is the inevitable drama of a bastard awakening to blood calling blood. But if he is a lion, then his revolt is the hard and lonely work of a man resisting the idol of legacy to make room for a different legacy. Candor, a certain harsh mercy, a refusal to flatter highborn follies even when it would be safer. It is not our custom at the Citadel to write that blood is a lie. It is not a lie, it is a law of nature and a habit of kings. But we are bound, if we are to be of any use to the world, to say that blood is not the strongest truth. The strongest truth in the Seven Kingdoms is that power, left unattended by conscience and shamed by compassion, will devour its own children. One sees this in Aerys, who burned the men who loved him most, and in Tywin, who cultivated a garden of order so stern that it could not admit the flower whose petals were misgrown. And in both cases the harvest was terror, and the son who lived under both shadows did not require dragon blood to learn how to step aside from their example and sometimes to follow it and then hate himself for following it. Indeed, the deepest argument against the secret Targaryen is no chronology or hair or the king's appetite. It is that the theory is a comfort disguised as a scandal, for it comforts us to believe that the strangeness that is Tyrion must be explained by some secret key, a royal adultery, a touch of sorcery, anything rather than the ordinary truth that a mind set at an angle to the world can see the world more clearly, and that clarity, pressed into service by the necessities of survival, can be both noble and monstrous. Consider how he delights in books that speak of dragons and the old ways, not because he suspects his blood, but because he knows that knowledge is the one vassal that has never betrayed him. Consider how he travels among sellswords and fools and learns their speech, not to seize a throne, but to live long enough to choose a better master than mere fear. Consider how, when given the chance to rule for a season in a city that despised him, he chose competence instead of pageantry, and in choosing competence, he became, for a brief hour, what his father pretended to be: a steward who places the lives of common men above the vanity of his own house's triumph. These are not dragonish endeavors, they are the crafts of a man who has measured power in his own skin and determined that he will not be crushed by it. To call him Aerys' Get is to put him back inside a legend he has already escaped. What then of Joanna, the woman around whom so much storm has been conjured? I say she deserves to be remembered not as the hinge of a scandal, but as the strong and tragic center of a house that was always better when its women were allowed to shape it. For the West, like the rest of the realm, prospers when its iron is tempered by the gentler alloys of kindness and a sense of proportion. The twins who survived her were not kinder for the privilege, though one, from time to time, attempted justice by a private code and the other learned to play at mercy as a dance with knives. The youngest, who killed her by living, sought the virtues she might have taught him in the only places that would have him: in the silence of the library and the frankness of the campfire. Perhaps that, more than any uncanny hint, is the dragon in him, the appetite for old knowledge, for high, dangerous things tamed by mind and law. But we have no monopoly on such hunger in any one house, nor should we ever pretend that we do. The Targaryens held dragons and held them badly, and their greatest lesson to us is that possession does not equal virtue, just as blood does not equal destiny. In the end, we must settle not merely a genealogical curiosity but a moral accounting, and ours is an age much inclined to abdicate morality to claims of birth, to say he was cruel because he was his father's son or she was merciful because she was her mother's daughter. Let us instead look upon Tyrion Lannister and say he was what he chose to be within the limits that fate built around him. And when he bent those limits, it was sometimes upward and sometimes downward, as is the habit of human beings. If on some page yet unwritten a letter surfaces proving beyond question that the king touched Joanna not once but many times, and that one of those times sprang him into being, I shall mark the fact and then retire the quill, for the fact will have satisfied the appetite of the curious without changing a single judgment that matters, which is how a man treated those beneath him when he was given the chance to command, how he regarded truth when a lie would have been more convenient, how he bore the weight of his body and the heavier weight of his name, how he loved and how he repented, whether he allowed the world's hatred to make him the world's mirror or found within himself the strength to become the world's critic. By these measures, which are the only measures that survive the collapse of dynasties and the cooling of pyres, Tyrion Lannister stands where he stands, neither absolved by dragonfire nor condemned by it. Not the king's hidden son but the father's undeniable reckoning. A creature of wit and will who proved that the feeblest frame can house a formidable conscience and that the brightest banners can fall from hands unworthy to hold them. So let the rumor drift with the other motes of dust in the light that passes through the great windows of memory, and let those who require marvels keep it as a toy to turn in their fingers on winter nights. But let the rest of us keep the heavier coin. The dwarf of Casterly Rock was the son of Tywin Lannister in all the ways that make a father's sentence a challenge and a son's life an answer, and if sometimes his answer was an accusation, well, that is what truth often is when it comes at last to sit with power. In this, at least, there is a dragon. Present, but it lives not in the blood, only in the heart that rejects comfortable lies, and one does not need Valyrian ancestors to breed such a beast, only courage and a long memory. Yet because rumor is a hardy vine that will climb any wall it finds and wrap its green tenacity round stone and iron alike, it is not enough to say that the matter of Tyrion's blood ought to be laid to rest. Vines return unless the gardener gives the wall another purpose, and so I would set before it a trellis of other truths, so that the climbing instinct in men has somewhere better to go than the cracked mortar of scandal. For men crave patterns as surely as thirst craves water, and if we deny them one pattern they will seize another even if it is poison. Thus let us look again upon the dwarf of Casterly Rock, not as the answer to a riddle of seed, but as the argument of a life. And in that argument we shall find materials enough to restrain the creeping fancy that he must be dragon-begotten. Start, then, with the oldest chronicle a man writes, the ledger of his first loves, and mark how the boy who begged a dragon was the boy who learned that fear has two faces, the one that crouches and the one that reads. When men mocked him, he did not kneel to beg mercy or rise to strike them first. He made of himself a library and a laugh, and both are unconventional armors that kings seldom suspect and lords rarely understand. For the book's spine seems too easily broken and the jest seems to admit the insult it deflects. Yet with these he purchased survivals dearer than the coin with the crowned stag upon it, and more than once he purchased allies, since the honest exchange of wit for respect is a currency that remains sound even when kingdoms fail. In the Vale he bought time with a story and a Sellsword's pride. And what is a Sellsword's pride but a contract written upon his own body, to be paid in blood or glory whichever is nearer? At the Eyrie, when a woman's grief and a sister's hatred demanded law to apologize for vengeance, he bent the old ritual of trial by combat toward justice, not because justice loves him, but because justice loves spectacle, and the dwarf provided a spectacle it could not decline. That day no dragon rose from beneath his feet to bear him aloft. A lean bravo with a quick blade did, and it is a lesson that the realm refuses to keep. The monsters that save us are usually men with nothing but their skill to recommend them, and the miracles that deliver us are often contracts fulfilled without banners. Later in the capital, where law and appetite were the same perfumes, Tyrion discovered the scale upon which princes weigh the city that feeds them, and he had the hard sense to put grain and water on the same plate with honor and victory, because he knew that glory purchased with famine is a debt that sooner or later breaks a house. He put a chain across a river and fire into glass and a little courage into the king's mouth, and by these three devices, steel that says no passage, wind that says burn, and words that say stand, he changed the shape of a battle whose outcome was supposed to be foreordained by names alone, and when the smoke blew seaward it did not spell Targaryen, it spelled competence, a language too few of our great families bother to teach their sons. Mark too the wound he took in the face and the colder wound he took in his soul in the same hour, for the blow that pared away his nose and the treachery that pared away his illusions were delivered by hands he should have been able to trust. The crown's sworn protectors on the field, the crown's blood in the bedchamber, and a lesser spirit would have made of such revelations a new religion of hatred. That he did not at once, is another argument against destiny by dragon. For the dragons of the old tales are most terrible when wronged, and they bleed rage until the earth is black. Tyrion bled sadness, caution, and increased appetite for truth badly served, and the bleak humor of a man who knows his sums come out poorly but will add again until the ledger's balance or the quill breaks. If you must name that quality, do not call it the inheritance of Valyria, call it the stubborn gift of Lannisport's stonecutters and miners, who go down and come up and go down again because the rock yields to patience when it will not yield to pride, and because the dark teaches a man to love the lamp, not his own reflection in it. Pride, in truth, is the coach and six that draws the rumor of his dragon blood through every street. For had Tywin Lannister not bound his house to the notion that perfection must look a certain way and speak a certain way and stand with a certain straightness, no one would read in Tyrion's crookedness a heresy that required explanation by sorcery. It is the spectacle of a father who cannot forgive his son for the chemistry of birth that makes stronger men reach for myths to protect their simple sense of fairness. And the myth they reach for is always the nobler blood concealed, the hidden prince who will make sense of the senseless by revelation at last. I say again that the nobler blood Tyrion concealed was never Valyrian. It was the nobility of admitting what is sordid and returning to the work nonetheless, as he did when he married a frightened girl in a great chamber and refused to turn cruelty into law, even when the father who commanded him would have liked the lesson to be rougher. That refusal cost him dear, as mercies often do, for mercy without allies breeds martyrs, and martyrs do not live to write their own chronicle. And yet even that hard wedding argues for the lion rather than the dragon, because the dragon of fable takes what it desires and sets the city alight if denied, whereas Tyrion desired and denied himself and tried to build, however clumsily, a little island of decency in a sea of bargains. The island broke, as islands will when storms are summoned by larger hands, and in his ruin he did a thing that cannot be excused and should not be explained away by reference to prophecy. For when he tightened the coral cord and let fly upon the man who made him, it was not fate's arrow but his own. Men who love him will say the old lion deserved it, and men who love the law will say the law deserved better, but history has room for both sentences, and the dwarf himself will have to abide both weights. No mythology lightens that load. That all comes before the path east, where the wind brings stranger songs and the gods speak in new tongues, but the old human reckonings remain the same. For there Tyrion discovered one of the realm's most ancient facts, that schemers the world over breed their plots in the same warm cellar, where disappointed hopes and injured pride ferment into grand designs. And he drank of that cellar's produce with a man whose silks hid a butcher's practicality, and with another who masked danger in a eunuch's careful smile. In their company he found a boy clothed in a history too fine to be worn by any boy of his age without chafing, and in the boy he saw the hunger that all the young have who were told they are born to remold the world, and he offered counsel dark only to those who think poor. Age is the same as purity. He told the lad to seize a wind while it blew and to trust deeds over promises, and the lad, being young and full of the arithmetic of glory, heard him. If the boy proves false or true does not alter the argument here, which is that Tyrion, in advising him, stood not as dragon or as lion but as the realm's oldest profession when the maesters are not nearby and the septons are asleep. He stood as experience, and experience is the coin minted by pain, the dragons. Chained in the city he never ruled did not bow to him, nor did their heat spare him for some secret kinship. And if any man says that distance explains this, bid him keep his fancies to his bed and his histories to his desk. The city with dragons in it cared nothing for his blood, only for the contracts of companies and the starving patience of slaves and the calculations of merchants, who know how many days a siege may be endured before bread becomes bones pounded into flour. And in such economies the only proof of ancestry that matters is the ability to keep men from dying needlessly. In the camps by those poisoned pyramids he gambled and bargained as all men must who lack battalions, and the fact that his gambles ran through a game of Sivas rather than a game of iron speaks only to his natural preference for arrangements that reveal the intent of the mind rather than the thickness of the arm. Some have said, in the voice of prophecy's delirium, that the mind which moves men, like carved elephants and spearmen across an inlaid board, is the same mind that binds dragons to the will of Valyria. And so they nod to themselves and say that even if proof wants, signs abound. But signs are the winter birds of our age. Every man sees in them the season he wishes, and when one tires of winter birds one remembers that Sivas was taught to him by a sell-sail and a fat magister, not by a ghost in a forge beneath a smoking mountain. If all this seems to tread far from the bedchamber where rumor seeks its cradle, remember that rumor is a lamp that must be carried through many rooms before it casts the shape of its bearer with any clarity. And the rooms we have visited show us a figure too resolutely of this earth to be credibly explained by hidden fire. Return now, if you must, to Ares and Joanna, to the king whose own guards' white cloaks yellowed in the smoke of his vices, and to the lady whose beauty was remembered. because it was accompanied by grace rather than sharpened by cruelty, and listened not to the coarser whispers but to the recollections of the few who had cause to keep their minds clean of flattery. They recall a sovereign who lusted as part of his rebellion against the discipline his friend imposed, and they recall a husband who swallowed a greater bitter than lust when that friend became his master, and between those two they place a woman who knew that the court devours what it praises and so took herself away. Even those who remember the king's jest about her after her confinement mark it as the sort of jest a man utters to punish another who outshines him, and it is a poor house that takes a jape for a genealogy. I will not say that kings do not do worse in the darkness, they do, but the darkness has its own record-keepers, and none came forward with a tale that would earn them half of Casterly Rock for telling it. The lack of such a tale is not proof, but it is sense, and sense often dies in the first volley when prophecy rides out. Yet we must also mark the strange seduction that always accompanies tales of hidden princes. They promise that the world is not merely cruel but meaningful, that the injuries suffered by worthy men are not accidents but signs, and that therefore some reckoning will come that dignifies our pain by turning it into prelude. What I argue is not that reckoning never comes but that it comes because men undertake it, not because blood uncorks it, and that Tyrion's life is a proof of this doctrine. His reckonings, for good and ill, are the fruits of deliberate choices and the wages of specific lies told by specific people, not the olives shaken down by the thunder of some buried god. Tisha remains the clearest example, and it is impossible to write of the dwarf's parentage without writing of the girl whose name is A. Bell he cannot stop hearing. Had Tywin not converted love into an invoice and taught his boy that tenderness is a crime to be punished in whorehouses, then perhaps there would have been a Lannister with a wife from the farms and a kinder rock for it, and perhaps the rumor of dragon seed would never have found such fertile soil. For where shame and sorrow seed the ground, marvels sprout, and men prefer a marvel that flatters their injured pride to a truth that convicts them. The rumor is in this sense an apology for a father, but it should convict him instead. If Joanna had been dishonored by a king, the husband who moves the heavens to avenge slights would have moved them then. That he did not tells us more than the rumor dares admit. What of those who say that the twins are the better candidates for the rumor's babe, for that would at least ease the stark arithmetic of the calendar? I do not advise replacing one elegant falsehood with another. It is a false discipline that must have a scandal even after one has been broken. Beyond that, it is a habit of our minds to transform a pattern that displeased us into a pattern that pleases and to call the transformation discovery. The twins' resemblance to their mother's house is unambiguous and the politics of their births unambiguous also, and had the king fathered them, it would not have been in his nature to keep such a triumph unboasted. Ares hoarded injuries to nurture his rage, but he scattered boasts like chaff to the wind. That he never hinted at such paternity, even in his later madness when prudence failed and spite commanded his tongue as a general commands a routed army, argues strongly that no such claim could be Ade without being laughed out of the hall. So the wall remains bare of dragons and ready, if we are honest, to receive a lion in relief. The Lion of Lon the Clever, whose legend is the one Tyrion actually inhabits. Consider how every tale of Lon's trickery begins in disadvantage and ends in invention, how castles heavier than any dwarf's doom were made to yield to feints and fictions, how voices spoken in the right ears at the right hours built ladders taller than any siege tower, and how the old families woke one morning and discovered that wit had evicted them while they slept. Tyrion is the purest son of that story seen in centuries, and in this way he is more Lannister than those who wear their house's gold like a skin. Indeed, the house's device, a lion upon red, cannot tell you which lion it depicts, the roaring weight of Tywin's kind, or the flexible, smiling, hungry kind that Lon perfected and that Tyrion, born to be crushed by the first, revived by necessity. The rumor of the dragon robs him of this consonance and replaces it with another he does not need. I have been accused by my juniors of starving romance when I write thus, but I rather think I feed a larger romance than the taverns allow, the romance of choosing in the dark and discovering that the path you make as you go by the light in your own hand is straighter than the highway set by the long dead. To keep the appetite for marvels sated, if such is needed, we may speak of prophecy with more careful manners. The three heads of the dragon, if they are to be more than a mummer's refrain, must denote functions rather than fatherings, and functions are not inherited but undertaken. The head that burns is not the same as the head that judges, and neither is the same as the head that remembers. Tyrion has been the head that remembers, and sometimes he has judged, and once he burned by proxy when wildfire lit the river, But none of this establishes a right of blood. It establishes an ability, and the realm would be saner if it rewarded abilities with trust instead of searching their owners' cradles for excuses to use or discard them. If then, perhaps one day a queen with unburnt feet should find him across a lemon-scented sea, and if she should sit him at the end of a table where dragons drowse like hounds and ask him how to govern hearts that do not love her, the counsel he gives will be neither better nor worse for any secret in his veins. It will be made of the same stuff as his counsel to sellswords and princes, which is the hard common sense that feeds armies and the cleaner honesty that, once in a while, feeds the soul. Should she prefer magic to sense, she will burn his words as he once burned Stannis' fleet, and should she prefer sense to magic, she will house his words in laws and markets and lesser flames, and in neither case will he need to be her brother, to be her servant or her friend. In the end, all this is a long road that returns to the first village we passed, where gossip stands in the door with folded arms and a dirty apron and says that the dwarf looks like no Lannister she has seen. I answer her that the realm is large and that the Lannister she has seen were choosing their mirrors carefully, and that sometimes the truest likeness is the one that refuses to flatter. If she is not satisfied, I will sit with her until the candles drown in their own wax and tell her the rest of the tale, the one about how a father's hatred is a river that seeks a sea and how a son can stand upon a bridge and be proof that men are not water. I will tell her that there are dragons in Westeros still, but they are virtues. Clarity that consumes falsehood like dry grass, patience that survives the long winter of contempt, courage to speak when silence is easier and safer. I will tell her that these dragons can be ridden by anyone and belong to no house, and that if she wishes to see a Targaryen in Tyrion, she should close her eyes and see instead a man who chooses which dragon to ride each morning and occasionally falls off and breaks a bone and then climbs back on. And if even that does not content her, I will take down a certain ledger from the shelf, small and scarred, in which I, who have seen kings die and girls break and cities starve, have written a single line beside the name Tyrion Lannister. He did not give his pain to prophecy. He spent it, coin by coin, on use. If we can teach more sons of great houses to spend their pain rather than guard it like heirloom plate, then perhaps the next time a rumor knocks upon the doors of the Rock demanding an audience, it will be turned away by stewards who have something better to do than polish old jokes into new genealogies. Until that hour, let us keep the harder comfort, which is the truth that men are what their choices make of them under the pressure of the world, and that, while blood may offer us customs and kin, it never absolves us of the daily arithmetic by which we measure what we owe and what we dare. By that arithmetic, the dwarf of the West owes nothing to the ashes of Valyria and everything to the mountain that birthed his house and the woman who died to birth him. He cannot pay her back, no son can repay such a debt, but he has, in his crooked way, tried to pay it forward, and the realm, which is poor in such payments, should recognize the coin by its ring and not by the prince's face it does not bear.